What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be talking about setting your tire pressures for the track. I'm going to be showing you the old school way and cheaper way of managing your tire pressure. You can literally drop seconds off your time in one day just by messing with tire pressures. By the end of this video, you'll have a great starting point for what tire pressures you should run if your car is understeering or if your car is oversteering. Typically, a rule I like to use is 1 psi per 100 pound of vehicle. I also need to say that you're aiming for your tire pressures to be hot. Now, this does vary when setting up for autox or the track, so right now let's just talk about autocross. Autocross runs usually last anywhere from 40 to 70 seconds, so you don't get as much heat in the tire as you do on the track, and they don't build as pressure as fast compared to a 10-20 minute session on track. Without me in it, the Evo weighs 3170 by itself, and I am a chonky boy, a good 6 foot 230. So with me in the Evo, it weighs 3,300 pounds. That will be my starting point. 33 psi in the front and 33 psi in the rear. When testing any new setup or new car to me or new mod I've made, this is how I always like to start. I start neutral like this. That way I can see what the car is doing. Is it understeering more or is it oversteering more? Is because the car will tell you what it needs. If it's understeer heavy, you're gonna want to bump up your rear tire pressures by 2 to 3 psi. So for example, on Evo, I run 33 front and 35 or 36 rear. That higher tire pressure in the rear will make the rears a little less grippy and help the car rotate just a little bit easier. All right, so let's say I'm about to go out for my first run. I'm gonna set my tire pressure to 33 psi in the front and 33 psi in the rear. That is the target tire pressures I'm at while the tires are cold. I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna do my run, I'm gonna push it, and I'm gonna come back and I'm going to take some data. We just did our first run. First thing we're gonna do is come and see where the tires are wearing and how much it is leaning over. You can see there's a definitive line of where the tire's wearing. And if you look right here, there's this little shoe, but most tires have triangle. Here's a good example on my Falcon RT660, and you can see where the wear is right at this little triangle. If you come in from a run and you look at your tires front and back and see where they're wearing, and if neither of them are nowhere near this little triangle, you're running too high of pressure. That means your tire is a little bit more ballooned, kind of like a half round, and it's not maximizing the tire contact patch as if the tire was flat with the ground. For example, on a tire like this, if you are this far away from it, I would go 1 to 2 psi to try and get closer to the triangle. Once you get the fronts dialed in and as close to that triangle as possible, or even riding on it a little bit, you don't want to go too much lower because you can cause rollover. Rollover is when you're carrying too much G-force and you don't have enough tire pressures and they kind of start to pinch in the sidewall. Here's a picture of what rollover looks like. As you can see in the sidewall of the tire, it has these kind of weird oily swoosh marks, and that's from the tire just kind of pinching in. Now, it's all right if you go too low and you do see these marks happening. All you got to do is just bump your pressures back up. Now that we have the front tire pressures figured out, you are going to be making most of your adjustments in the rear tires to affect the handling of your car. So up to this point, if you're enjoying the content and feel like I'm definitely providing some educational value to you, make sure you hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. While still aiming to get as close to the triangle as possible in the rear, it's not as vitally important because the majority of your weight is always in the front of the car. You're slamming on your brakes, you're turning in, all those kinds of things. Majority of your weight transfer is done in the front of the vehicle. All-wheel drive cars and front-wheel drive cars are understeer heavy. You're gonna want more tire pressure in the rear to help it rotate around. Now, this is kind of where it can come into play of if you like a more stuck driving style or if you like a more loose driving style. The more pressure you run in the rear than the front and you keep going up and up, the rear will get looser and looser. Me personally, I like a little bit more of a stuck driving style just because I want to really be able to hook coming out of the corner. But some guys who have lower horsepower cars just want to be able to throw it into the corner, have the rear really kick out on them, and then just stomp through the corner to carry that momentum. It does depend on car setup, but we'll talk about that in a separate video. So let's cover rear wheel drive cars now. Typically, rear wheel drive cars are oversteer heavy. And by that I mean typically, because my dad's BMW, when we took it out to an event, it was an understeer monster. So like I said, typically cars that are oversteer heavy, your rear is going to kick out on you more, so you actually want to drop your rear pressures by 2 to 3 psi starting out to improve your rear grip. We'll use my buddy Jonah FRS as an example for how I set up tire pressures to get it to handle really good. You will still be using the tips I showed you in the first half to get your front tire pressures near those triangles and trying to maximize that contact patch as best you can. And this kind of goes back to my rule of thumb of 1 psi per 100 pound of vehicle. The FRS does weigh 2,700 pounds. So perfect example, when I got with my buddy Jonah and we co-drove for one of the Houston events, he's like, oh, I like to run 27. I go out, I do one run, and the car just feels really loose to me with equal tire pressures like that, and the rear is coming around on me a lot. So I started to drop tire pressure in the rear. At the end of the day, I actually ended up at 26 front and 23 rear, and the car felt absolutely amazing and like it was on rails. Jonah himself was even surprised.
Damn! I don't know my car can stick like that. Holy shit!
I've co-drove a handful of vehicles that were all rear-wheel drive. My buddy's MG Midget, a 350Z, a C5 Z06, and a boosted Miata. And all of them liked less tire pressure in the rear to improve rear grip. Two other notable factors are your sidewall size and your suspension setup. Typically, the smaller rim you get on, like a 17, 16, 14, 15, your sidewalls tend to go up from a 30, 35 to a 40 to 55. So the taller the sidewall, the easier it is for it to flex and pinch over. So if you're following that 1 psi per 100 pound of vehicle, you could be overusing the tire. So, and this is just kind of a loose rule. So let's say when you have like a 195 45 or 50 or 55, let's add 3 psi to that. This will kind of help, you know, for that taller sidewall. Next thing I talk about is how soft your suspension is. My Evo, on one hand, is fully built with nice stiff suspension, and that 33 to 35 psi is good for it. But that is not the case for my Golf R. Knock springs are a lot softer than a full built coilover suspension. So the body roll on this bad boy is much, much worse, and the tire rolling over is also worse. A local autocross veteran, David Hederick, actually co-drove me with last weekend and gave me some tips I had never thought of before. You know how at the beginning of the video I said, you know, run 3 psi more in the rear if it's understeering and you want to help it rotate? That's not the case when you're on softer suspension. We actually ran 37 psi in the front, and that was the best place it was before it started rolling over. And for the rear, we were running 47 or 48 psi. Never have I ran 10 to 12 more psi in the rear tires, but it actually really helped. The car rotated so much better at autocross. So after you have completed run 1, you want to start checking your triangles, and you want to check your tire pressures after every single run, improving them as you go every run, and also double check that you're dropping time while you're doing it. As you start to learn the car and build confidence in how it is handling, you can push it harder and faster. By about your 3rd or 4th run, your tire pressures will start to even out. So another loose rule of thumb you can use, let's say it's a 70-degree day or lower, your tires aren't going to get as hot, so they're not going to go up as much. At the end of your first run, you can come in and touch the tire and it'll still be relatively cold. And some days, if it's really cold, you're just not going to build heat in the tire the entire event or the entire day. Now, let's say it's, you know, it is Texas here and it gets hot a lot. Majority of the year it's hot. Let's say it's 85, 90 degrees. When you show up to the event, set the tire pressures to the ideal ones that you want to start at, you know, that rule of thumb I use. And then when you line up in grid to go do your runs, check them again and set them again. If it's a good 80, 85, 90 degree day, your tire pressures just sitting in the parking lot will have gone up 2 to 3 psi. Go ahead and reset them to the pressures we kind of discussed for the rule of thumbs, and then go do your rip. Now on these hotter days, especially even the hotter it gets, you can come back from one run and the tire's already warm from just sitting there in the sun, and it will go up 4 or 5 psi in one run. But you always need to be checking your tire pressures. When you get to the event, set them desired pressures. Before your first run, check them and set them desired pressures. And then, you know, use these little tips and tricks I've taught you throughout the video. Let's now talk about setting tire pressures at the track. The track is a lot different than autocross because you're out there for, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes. The tires are gonna get heat in them regardless. You know, an average 60-second autocross run of going full tilt or a good 10, 15, 20 minutes of pushing your car, they're just gonna get more heat. You're aiming for your hot temperatures, just like we discussed, you know, kind of with the triangles, whether the car is oversteer or understeering, where you want those pressures, you just need to drop them starting before you go out on a track session. So, prime example for the Evo, if I'm aiming for 34 hot front and 36 hot rear, I actually set the tire pressures a good 5 to 7 PSI difference cold. So then you're gonna go out on track, you're gonna start doing your warm-up lap, then you're gonna do a hot lap, maybe another hot lap, and let's say a cool down lap. You're doing your cool down lap, you drive into the pits, you park, you immediately wanna check your tire pressures with getting out of the car because you've already kind of had that cool down lap and all that time driving to the pits. Whether you're at autocross or the track, it definitely helps to be taking notes with all of these little setups while you're doing it. Something like this, I have a traction journal, and here you can see I was at Chase Field. Here's a little course map I had, and here's little, you know, kind of tips, tire pressures I started at, what they ended up at, how they were working, was the car rotating. I think that thing was like 30 bucks. Now you don't have to buy something like that, but you should definitely have a notepad and be keeping track of what tire pressure you're running and kind of what weather was like that day, and just so next event you have some notes to go back and look at before. So I hope you all enjoyed the tips I gave you. Now this is not the this all be all, it has to exactly be like this. These are just starting points to get you going. You definitely have to play with your setup, but they will get you starting off much better than if showing up to the track without knowing what you're doing at all. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell for future videos. Peace out, y'all.